stabbed to death by some Islamic nutcase who targeted them because they were Christian little girls at a dance club in Southport. The Southport atrocities.
Yes.
Where 3 little baby girls, what were they, 5, 6, 7, stabbed to death by some Islamic nutcase who targeted them because they were Christian little girls at a dance club in Southport.
Yeah.
That incident changed this country.
Yes.
And as we discussed previously, 7 years before on my street in the city centre, the Manchester Arena blew up. I heard the bomb go off. 22 people died, and all we did was sing songs in the street about not looking back in anger.
Yeah.
That incident in the summer 2020 changed this country. Keir Starmer came down hard on us all and locked people up as political prisoners, but that's only a sticking plaster for him. The anger's out there. The anger, I think, has been doubled because of his reaction to it. He didn't handle it well. In fact, he handled it the worst way you could have handled it.
Horrifically, but we suspect as well there may be reasons he handled it that way as well.
Possibly, and that'll all come out next year. But I think that one incident, those 3 little beautiful girls being murdered, changed this country, changed our opinion finally on mass immigration. And when the history of this country is written, and they reference this point of time, that will be where they say things changed on that day. And I think that's a story of the year.
Well, I'd like to make 2 comments about that, and I think you're right, by the way. In fact, in terms of the impacts in this country, that probably is the most significant thing. But you're right, the Trump thing is a happy thing, but it's a positive step.
Yeah.
2 things I'd like to say about that. Firstly, there's a level of irony there, because this guy was born in the UK, and we don't know he's a Muslim, so it's nothing to do with immigration. However, in terms of people's thoughts on immigration, it shifted their thoughts on immigration at that point. There's no doubt about that. And the second thing is to kind of flatter you, Nick, because you were predicting before this happened there was going to be an event, and I think you said there's going to be another event. It's not going to be, it'll be something like the Manchester Arena, but not the Manchester Arena, and you were right, and that will mobilise people. Now, the sad thing about that is it did mobilise the people, and I think I went on one of the protests. However, because of the nature of the government, those people were suppressed, horrifically suppressed. They were captured, they were imprisoned, they were given no real civil rights in that process. They were forced to plead guilty, and they are now, I regard, as our true political prisoners. Peter Lynch being a particular example, a guy who was in prison for nothing and who committed suicide in prison, and we have Tommy Robinson in prison now. So you were right, there was an event, and I think you're right, that was the kind of...
And there's more events coming down the line.
There's going to be more events coming. That was a highly crystallising event, more than any other thing. And you're right. Why would it be? Because it was 3 people killed versus 22. But that, I think people, since the Manchester bombing, to get to this point, people had already moved mentally.
That was it.
And those 3 beautiful little girls getting killed triggered lots of people. And lots of people who didn't do the tweets have seen what's happened, and their views are hardening about what the right thing to do. I'm pretty sure about that. So part of this process of people's views changing and things being more open, and you being able to say the N-word on, was a major part of that. Was, you're right, the Southport event. In terms of events of the year, no doubt about it.
Mass immigration has been a pressure cooker issue in this country for a long time, and every time it looks like it's going to boil over, the government put another weight on the pressure cooker to keep it down. And just when we got the Southport atrocities, we thought that was going to blow then, but the government, it started to blow. The government put a heavier weight on it, but you only can put so much weight on a pressure cooker. Eventually it explodes, and the longer you leave it, the bigger the explosion. So that's all Keir Starmer's done with the Southport incident, was he's delayed it for another day, and when it explodes another day, it's going to be bigger and more violent and more destructive, which is a shame, because we should have dealt with this decades ago, and it never would have got to this intensity.
Our views differ on that, though, don't they, Nick, in terms of the reaction? My view, when the people took to the streets protesting, I agreed with it. And you said you didn't agree with violence, but I think sometimes there comes a point when violence is the only answer to these situations, where you're being oppressed, where things are out of control, where the government are not listening to the electorate. You know, I think we had reached that point then. We're at that point now. And I'm not opposed to, you know, I might get arrested for this now, but I'm not opposed to violence on the streets to represent what, you know, for people to get their points across. Because what else have they got now?
I'm not opposed to violence as a last resort. I just don't think we're at that point yet. I think the people around the issue of Southport who turned to violence, they were useful idiots for the government.
Yeah.
They gave the government the excuse they needed to clamp down. If they'd not turned to violence and setting hotels on fire and throwing bricks at the police, and whether or not there's an excuse for that or not, I'm not discussing that. If they'd not have done that, and it had been a peaceful protest, a mass movement across the country, that could have brought down the government.
Yeah.
But the second it turned to violence, that was all the excuse they needed. Now, violence is always a last resort, and we do need violence at some point. Otherwise, Hitler would have won the Second World War. If we all went, violence is not the answer. Well, it is when you're dealing with Hitler.
Yes.
And it is when you're dealing with a communist regime, which Keir Starmer's turning this into. But it's a last resort. We're not there yet.